May 1981. Mestre, Italy. A teenage boy stands over the bodies of his own parents, his hands stained with a choice that would ignite a cross-border reign of terror. This was just the beginning for Roberto Succo. A man with the face of an angel and the mind of a monster, Succo would become Europe's most wanted fugitive, a chameleon who slipped through the fingers of police in Italy, France, and Switzerland. He was known as the Harlequin for his uncanny ability to change identities, his erratic violence, and his mocking defiance of authority. We descend into the chaotic mind of a man who turned all of Europe into his personal hunting ground. Welcome to Well of Monsters. The nightmare began in a quiet, middle-class apartment in Mestre, near Venice. Roberto Succo was 19, a student who seemed unremarkable to his neighbors. But on a Tuesday morning, a trivial argument over the keys to the family car triggered a volcanic eruption of violence. Roberto took a kitchen knife and attacked his mother, Maria, stabbing her over 30 times in a frenzied assault. He didn't stop until she was silent. Then, he did something even more chilling. He cleaned the knife, sat down and waited. Hours later, his father, Roberto Succo, a respected police officer, returned home from work. As he stepped through the door, his son was waiting in the shadows. Roberto struck with lethal precision, killing his father instantly. With both parents dead, Roberto moved their bodies to the bathtub, carefully washing away the blood as if he were cleaning a spill. He spent the night in the apartment with the corpses, and the next day, he went out with his friends, laughing and joking. When the bodies were eventually found, the police were horrified to find their own colleague murdered by his flesh and blood. Roberto was caught shortly after, but this was only the opening act of a much larger tragedy. Following his arrest, Roberto Succo was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. The court found him incapable of standing trial due to his mental state and ordered him to be confined in a psychiatric prison in Reggio Emilia. For the next 5 years, Succo became a model patient. He was intelligent, soft-spoken, and highly manipulative. He convinced the doctors that his moment of madness was a one-time explosion, a result of a chemical imbalance that was now under control. He studied, he exercised, and he waited for his opportunity. By 1986, the authorities made a fatal mistake. Based on his exemplary behavior, Succo was granted a regime of semi-liberty, allowing him to leave the facility during the day to attend university classes. On a Friday afternoon in May, Roberto walked out of the prison gates and never looked back. He didn't go to class. Instead, he stole a bicycle, then a car, and began a journey toward the French border. He had no money, no ID, and no plan other than to never be caged again. The man the doctors thought was cured had simply been sharpening his claws. Once across the border into France, Succo reinvented himself. He realized that his good looks and athletic build were his greatest assets. He began to live as a ghost, shifting through different identities like a stage actor. In one town, he was a Swiss student, in another, an Italian tourist on a gap year. He became known as the Harlequin because he was impossible to pin down. He would commit a burglary in the morning, a carjacking in the afternoon, and be seen dancing at a disco in a different city by midnight. His crimes in France started small but quickly turned lethal. He developed a deep-seated hatred for authority, especially the police. In 1987, near the town of Treviso, he was approached by a gendarme named Luc Barbier for a routine check. Without a moment's hesitation, Succo pulled a weapon and shot the officer in the head before disappearing into the woods. The French authorities were baffled. They were looking for a professional criminal, but they were actually dealing with a chaotic force of nature who killed for no reason and left no trail. The violence escalated throughout 1987. Succo began a spree that felt like a descent into pure nihilism. In April, he kidnapped and murdered a young woman named Claudine de Trich in the French Alps. A few weeks later, he shot a physician in cold blood just to steal his car. There was no pattern to his victims, no sexual motive, and no financial gain that justified the risk. He killed because he felt a sudden urge to erase a life, and then he moved on as if he had just finished a meal. The French gendarmerie launched an unprecedented operation to find him. His face was plastered on every news station, and he became a household name, the monster from Italy. Yet, Succo seemed to enjoy the fame. He would often frequent bars where the news was playing, watching his own description being read aloud while he sipped a drink. He was playing a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek with an entire nation, and he was winning. His ability to blend into crowds and charm strangers made him the ultimate predator. During his run, Succo met a young woman named Sarah. To her, he was Kurt, a charming and mysterious traveler. For months, they lived a surreal, nomadic life, traveling across the French Riviera and into Switzerland. Sarah was captivated by his energy and his stories, unaware that the man she was sleeping next to was the most wanted killer in Europe. But as time went on, the mask began to slip. She noticed his sudden bursts of rage and the way his eyes would go completely dead during an argument. She witnessed him stealing cars and changing license plates with a professional speed that terrified her. Succo eventually confessed to her that he had killed people, but he did it with such a detached, almost bored tone that she didn't know whether to believe him. When she finally realized the truth, she fled, becoming one of the few people to encounter the Harlequin and survive. Her testimony would later provide the police with the first real psychological profile of the man they were hunting, a man who didn't fear death but craved the chaos that preceded it. In January 1988, the police finally got a solid lead. Succo was spotted in the port city of Toulon. A group of elite officers moved in to corner him in an apartment complex. It should have been the end of the story, but Succo had other plans. When the police burst through the door, he engaged them in a violent shootout, using his knowledge of the building to escape through a back window. He hijacked a car at gunpoint, forcing the driver to take him past the police cordons. The brazenness of the escape humiliated the French authorities. The Harlequin had danced through their fingers once again. This event changed the public perception of Succo from a common criminal to a sort of dark folk hero or a terrifying phantom. He was now considered armed and extremely dangerous, with orders given to shoot on sight if he resisted. The hunt was no longer just about justice, it was a matter of national pride. Perhaps driven by a subconscious desire to complete a circle, or simply because he was running out of places to hide, Succo returned to Italy in early 1988. He crossed the Alps in the middle of winter, a feat of physical endurance that showed his desperation. He arrived in the Treviso area, not far from where his first murders had taken place 7 years earlier. He tried to blend in, but Italy was on high alert. The Italian police had been coordinating with the French, and they knew it was only a matter of time before he came home. In February, an off-duty officer was eating in a pizzeria when he noticed a man who looked remarkably like the photos from the international bulletins, and he called for backup. Succo, with his sharpened instincts, felt the atmosphere change. He didn't finish his meal. He walked out of the restaurant and disappeared into the maze of streets in Treviso. The net was finally closing, and for the first time, the Harlequin looked like he was running out of breath. The confrontation in Treviso turned into one of the most bizarre spectacles in Italian criminal history. Police tracked Succo to an apartment building where he had taken refuge. Realizing he was surrounded, Succo climbed out of a skylight and onto the roof. For several hours, he engaged in a tense standoff with hundreds of armed officers, snipers, and helicopters circling overhead. The entire event was broadcast live on television, turning a manhunt into a morbid reality show. On the roof, Succo was clad only in his underwear despite the freezing February cold. He paced the tiles like a leopard, performing acrobatic lunges and shouting defiance at the crowd below. He mocked the police, demanding a car and a clear path to the border while performing pull-ups on the edge of the roof to show off his strength. He was a man who knew the end was coming and decided to make it a performance. Eventually, the cold and the realization that there was no escape broke his spirit. He climbed down and surrendered, his face fixed in a mocking smirk as the handcuffs were clicked shut. Even in prison, Roberto Succo remained a nightmare for the authorities. He was placed in a high-security cell in Vicenza, under 24-hour surveillance. But the Harlequin wasn't done yet. Within days of his capture, he attempted one of the most daring escapes ever recorded. He managed to climb over a series of walls and fences, reaching the outer perimeter of the prison before he was spotted by a guard in a watchtower. He was brought back, but the incident proved that no cage could truly hold him. The legal battle between Italy and France began. Both countries wanted him for a laundry list of murders, kidnappings, and assaults. Criminologists and psychiatrists flocked to his cell, trying to understand what drove a man to such senseless, multinational violence. Succo refused to cooperate with most of them, giving cryptic or contradictory answers. He seemed to loathe the idea of being categorized or explained. To him, he was simply a force of will, a man who had lived more in 7 years of flight than most people live in a lifetime. In May 1988, exactly 7 years to the month after the murder of his parents, Roberto Succo decided to close the curtain. He knew that his future held only gray walls and the prying eyes of doctors. He had lived for the thrill of the chase, and without the chase, he was nothing. On a Sunday night he used a small gas stove he had been allowed for making coffee, a massive oversight by the prison staff. He placed a plastic bag over his head, secured it, and turned on the gas. He was found the next morning, silent at last. His death left a void where justice should have been. Many of the families in France and Italy never got their day in court, never heard a confession, and never understood why their loved ones had been chosen. Roberto Succo remains a haunting figure in European history, a man who proved that a single, fractured mind can terrorize an entire continent. He was the Harlequin of death, a man who wore 1,000 masks and left behind a trail of blood that time has yet to wash away. Was Succo a calculated killer or a victim of his own shattered mind? Subscribe, ring the bell, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Take care, and I'll see you at the bottom of the well.